Louis, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't we just pick up on Ukraine, first of all, because you guys have been involved with the Ukrainians and in particular have announced recently that you're working with them and the UK and US to some extent on analysing the data that they've had from the front line, particularly as it relates to drones.
Yes, thank you for having me. We've been working very closely with the Ukrainians since the outbreak of hostilities there, since Russia's invasion almost 4 years ago. And we announced over the course of this week, I was in Kiev on the weekend, an important development on the technology side with their armed forces, which is actually focused on air defenses. And we think, and this gave me actually a lot of hope, it's the first time I've come back from a trip to Ukraine for some time with a renewed sense of hope that they might be developing a technical advantage that will start to give them a path to long-term survival on the battlefield.
So I guess the scale of innovation, despite being, or maybe perhaps because they're in the middle of a war, the technological innovation they're delivering on the front line is incredibly impressive, and in fact probably well ahead of the technology that, for example, our military has at the moment.
Well, I think when you're in a conflict, it's an existential crisis. You have a sense of urgency that doesn't exist in peacetime. And of course, you're dealing with an adversary who adapts. So every time you develop something new on the battlefield, a new bit of technology, your opponent will develop some kind of countermeasure. And that's what we've seen play out over the last 4 years, where you could think of it like a cat and mouse game, where the Ukrainians develop something, the Russians develop a countermeasure, and back and forth. And we're seeing that evolution, those generations of technology, that every 6 to 8 weeks, whatever was on the battlefield becomes obsolete, and it's a new generation of technology.
How do you as a company decide which countries, on particularly the topic of defence, all-important topic of defence, to work with and which not to work with? Who makes that ultimate decision?
Well, we've had a policy since the very inception of Palantir that we exist to help the West win. So we have never worked with countries that we would consider adversarial to the West, Russia, China, and so forth. So we work exclusively for the West and its allies. So that means that when the war broke out in Ukraine, it was very straightforward for us. We were going to be there to support the Ukrainians for as long as it took to keep them in the fight and resist Russian aggression.
And that is the decision ultimately just of your boss?
We are a company, so yes, from a corporate governance point of view, it is ultimately the leadership of the company that decide this, but it is company policy and has been from the very outset. And we work extremely closely with the military and national security establishments of the US, the UK, NATO, and many of the member states and their allies.
Speaking more broadly, and I know obviously you're the head of UK Europe for Palantir and based in London, do a lot of work here. Over the last 2 decades, everyone, all economists have lamented somewhat at the lack of productivity growth in the UK. How much can AI do to change that? Are you optimistic that as a nation we're doing the right things to boost productivity growth, or are you worried that we're not doing enough?
I think AI is the biggest productivity boosting technology that has emerged for potentially hundreds of years. I think it's of a scale of the Industrial Revolution, the impact it's going to have on our economy, on our daily lives. So the opportunity is immense. I think the UK is extremely well placed, actually, to take advantage of this new technology. Much of it is actually developed in the UK. Outside of the US, the only country in the West, broadly defined, that has the talent base that's required to build groundbreaking AI and AI companies is actually the UK. It's no accident that Palantir has 20% of its global headcount in London, or that Google DeepMind, the AI side of Google, is headquartered in the UK. So from a human capital point of view, we're incredibly well positioned. The challenge, of course, is you need the AI infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, to start being built at pace in the UK. I would also actually commend the government. This is an area where the current government has been very forward-leaning. The AI action plan that they published at the beginning of last year was really, I think, exactly what governments should be doing with regards to AI, which is really focusing on how do we increase uptake, how do we increase adoption, because that means we'll realize the benefits more quickly.
Clearly, some of the deals or partnerships that have been announced have divided opinion. Palantir is working with the NHS to try and improve efficiencies there. And the latest politician to come out against that has been Zack Polanski. To what extent can you understand people questioning your partnership with NHS, which has so much private information of so many individuals? And what is your response to those criticisms?
Well, the criticisms are based on a misapprehension about the nature of our technology and our business model. So the NHS controls all of the data that the NHS has. They simply use our software to process it, which means Palantir does not have access to that information. We don't monetize that information. We have no business interest in it. And so fundamentally, that criticism is not founded on any kind of truthful premise. And so that means that I frankly, I find it disappointing. I mean, as a Brit, I want the NHS to work. I want it to help me, my family, my friends. And when politicians take an ideological position against a technology that can help patients, by the way, we have helped over the last year 80,000 people in Britain get hospital appointments, treatments, and actually operations that they would not otherwise have got if the technology were not in place. So Zack Polanski is putting ideology over patients, and I think that's sad.
Louis Mosley, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. From Davos, the head of UK and Europe for Palantir.